What is one of the most common human desires out there? You probably would have heard of one of the things known as the sort of 7 stages. It's like a pyramid, and it's the 7 stages of the human necessity desire. I think control as being one of the most basic human desires, has to be in there somewhere. And I do think that a lot of the most prioritized basic human desires are derived from having control over their own life. I think health, maybe security, and safety, sort of the same thing. They're all sort of under the branch of being one of the most priority things for human need and necessity. Health, if you're healthy, you're not going to suddenly develop adverse reactions. You're not suddenly going to develop heart attacks, strokes, metabolic syndrome, obesity. If you are safe, if you are secure, you're not suddenly going to be attacked by predators. That all derives from control. Freedom as well derives from having control. If you are healthy, you have control, you obtain control over your own body because you can act in a better way, in a more controlled way than what you normally would. If you are safe, if you are secure, if you're not panicking, you feel like you're in control of your own personal situation. Humans are natural control freaks. We want things to go our way. We don't like when random things get in our way and happen. That's just how the human brain, from what I've observed in a society and the people around me, seems to happen. We don't like it when things just randomly change and randomly happen because it ruins our routines that we naturally as humans set in place. I always like to base things off of tribal analogies and how things used to happen when we were living in caves, living in dens, and just roaming around the woods, trying to not work all day in an office, not work all day in the modern technological society that we've developed. We would literally work and hunt for our basic necessities and our basic food. We would hunt, we would search for water, and we'd hunt for food. And that was it. If you didn't do that, then you die. But that is the only thing that gave a tribal human being, an ancestral human being, joy and enough happiness to be sufficient and have a good enough mental health in a weird sort of way to actually carry on going, living that life that they do every single day. I really do think control and the fact that it's such a core human desire is such an interesting topic. No one likes to be out of control. No one likes to not be the person in control of their own personal situation. People don't realize that derives from being in control. They don't make the link between not liking being out of control and having control over their lives, that they're the two sort of opposite things in a weird sort of way. No one likes to be in a passenger seat with a reckless driver, for example. That's not something that I've ever personally experienced, but it seems like quite an obvious thing. You wouldn't like to be in a passenger seat with someone that's driving recklessly because you fear for your own life, you fear for your safety, you fear for your health, you fear for your security. It all derives from control, and I feel it's such a philosophical thing to talk about and discuss and understand. I hope someone can understand and resonate with me. That's why there's been such a burst of businesses and entrepreneurships, because you're in control. You're not in control when you work a job, any job, no matter what job it is. But when someone else is paying you, even in the sense of the fact that consumers are giving the entrepreneurs money for the products that they sell, I feel like that, there is still somewhat of a lack of control there, and I will get to that in a little bit. When you are being paid by someone who is your boss, your manager, when you're being paid by someone who is above you, you don't necessarily feel as secure because you're not in control. You're not the one that's in control of the pay flow that comes to you. That's why many people are choosing to run businesses, be an entrepreneur, because they love control. And even if they are in a job, so many people I've spoken to, they want their freedom, they want success out of life. That's, even though like having the desire for the big house, the big car, the big watch, the freedom, the retirement early of life, that's what everyone wants, because that derives from having control over your own personal situation and over your life. So that makes a lot of sense in a weird sort of way. So many people that I've worked with, that I've just spoken to in general daily life, they would love to just own a business instead of being in their current situation. No matter how much they like their current situation, they would, if anyone I've asked, they've said they would win the lottery. If they won the lottery tomorrow, they always say that they just live out a life of control. They didn't word it like that, but how I could interpret it and infer it, it was always like, oh, I just live like this, I'd rent out a stable, I'd do this, I'd do that. It all derives from owning something and being in control of something, being in control of your own life. Whereas not being in control of your own life, as a lot of people in the current modern societal situation are. Many people are out of control. They constantly are going out and drinking to forget their problems. Alcohol is a chemical that means that you go out of control, and people want to be out of control because it's like a spiral. The more you are out of control of your own personal situation, the more you just want to leave your own soul, leave your physical body. And that's what happens when you do take things like drugs and stuff. You almost leave your own self, and you don't become yourself. You're sort of in control of the person that's not actually you. Very weird stuff. Very, very weird philosophical, psychological stuff. Control is such a basic human desire, and you will be happy if you obtain it. Enough said. If you imagine the entrepreneur, I said I'd get to this in a bit, but if you imagine the entrepreneur, while you have more control of your own income because you were designing things that people are paying for, you were creating things, you're producing things, and it's almost your responsibility in a way if the consumer isn't buying your own thing. There's a level of personal responsibility to their own production supply, to their own job, to their own control. They're responsible for their own control because they're responsible for their income, because they're making things that consumers will like to buy and they'd like to use it. But if you are in a job, any job, take anything, doctor to lawyer, if you were suddenly made redundant by your company, by your firm, that's not your fault. That's not your fault. You didn't necessarily do anything wrong. Because that is a possibility, you're not necessarily in as much of a control state as someone who is an entrepreneur. And while the market may crash as an entrepreneur, the thing that you're producing, people may just suddenly not want it anymore. That can happen. But I feel like, while there are pros and cons to both of these things, there is a lot more personal responsibility in the world of entrepreneurship, the industry of entrepreneurship, than there is in the world of careers, because things could just happen that are bad. And when you're an entrepreneur, you're working by yourself. You become more personally responsible when you work by yourself than when you're working with people that could do things that affect you that aren't necessarily your fault. There's more stuff that could happen as someone that works in a career, and this is like why many people are switching to entrepreneurship. This isn't me dissing any of these two things. This is just why I've personally observed a lot of people would prefer to own a business and have that control than necessarily work in a career that while they may get paid a lot, they don't necessarily feel, weird stuff. I may be wrong on some of the stuff that I've said, but this is just from my observation of why many people would like to be entrepreneurs. They'd like to own businesses and just live a happy, stable life, but they can't, or for whatever reason, because they don't have the money to start things up. If they won the lottery tomorrow, they would, but not many people win the lottery tomorrow, and if they do, not many people do good things with said money. So yeah, interesting stuff. But even in someone who's an entrepreneur, right, if the market crashes, if consumers don't like the thing that they're producing anymore, they're screwed. There's a level of personal responsibility to it. They could switch to another market, and while you could do that with jobs, you are very much defined to your speciality, which isn't such a bad thing, but you're very much defined to the things that you did in school, your level of education, which comes from a lot of time investment of years that you spent in said education system. So your options are a lot more narrowed down. If you're an entrepreneur, you can network, you can join other industries, and you can get jobs, and you can then build up from there. There's a level of personal responsibility to being an entrepreneur and working on your own, which is the reason that I think many people would actually like to take that risk if they won the lottery, for instance. But even then, it's not a complete nullified lack of control. There's always the risk of being an entrepreneur. There's always the risk of losing everything. There's always the risk of the government taking your house away because you did a big bad thing with your accounting. There's always a risk to both of these things, which is an interesting thing, because when I mentioned the tribal analogy earlier, the reason I think that these people were always so much happier when we were back as our ancestors were, when we were back as tribal people were, because they had utter control over everything that happened in their lives. The big climax. This is why tribal people, suicide is an absolutely uncommon, unfathomable thing to people who live that way, because they have utter control over their lives. Humans don't like not being in control. And so when all you do every day is hunt food for you and your family so that you can survive and eat, and it's your personal responsibility to do that, of course you're going to be happier, because obviously you'll be sadder if you don't achieve that thing, but your reward level is so much greater when you do achieve that thing, because you're all in control, and you're in control of your environments, your surroundings. While nowadays the tribal people are less in control, because tribes do still exist, of course, but they're less in control because of things like environmental damage caused by things like the Western societies, or not even Western, just general advancing societies as a whole. Pollution, environmental pollution, and climate change, that's going to affect the tribal people. That's going to mean that they're not in control. But when it was 20,000 years ago and everyone was in that situation as a tribe, as communities, they all had control, because there was abundant nature. There was always a deer over there that you could catch, but you had to have the skill to catch it. You had to have the personal responsibility of still having to feed your family, which gives humans quite a lot of sense of joy and fulfillment and pleasure as well. But yeah, that's why I think that tribal people were so much happier as an individual than what humans currently are. I still, to an extent, because I'm a kid, I don't feel as much in control as I would personally like to in my life, which is why I'm weirdly obsessed with like this tribal sort of lifestyle, because it is the way to happiness in a weird sort of way. The way to happiness to me does seem like freedom and control. If you disagree, please write it down in the comments. If you did watch the whole way through, very much appreciate it. But I also recommend subscribing, because I will produce so much more content like this, and I love this community of young tribal people who are willing to improve themselves so much more than they already have, and good luck.